Hi guys, Jackie from Famished Farm, and we're back in the kitchen this week making some apple treats. Now these are not on the healthy end of the spectrum. These are things that I'm going to put in the freezer and limit our quantities. We've been stopping at farm stands and even in Aldi the other week we found some new apples, at least new to me, called sweet tangos. So today's recipes, we're going to be using the Galas that I always have in the house and these new sweet tango apples. The first recipe I'm doing is from food.com, a baked apple cider donut. Now, I had to buy special pans for this recipe, which I bought a couple years ago and just haven't used, which is my first note. Don't buy special pans for recipes till you know that you really like the recipe. I've had this recipe for an awfully long time. One of my favorite things during apple season is going to Edward's Apple Orchard up in northern Illinois. They have the best apple cider donuts and it's a once a year treat. So I'm really hoping this recipe will duplicate that. At least be a good substitute. Our second recipe from Real Simple Magazine, the current issue, October 2024, is for an apple fritter cake. This is another treat that I remember from my craft show days down in Florida. There was a vendor that always had apple fritters, so I'm looking forward to this one. And our last recipe, which I think my husband's really gonna love, is an apple cinnamon roll. That one's from southernliving.com. So guys, let's get cooking. I'm excited about this recipe because I'm really trying to find a non-fried version of a donut that tastes like my favorite up north. Now, this one we're going to start with preheating our oven to 325, and then we're going to bring some apple cider, or in my case, some apple juice, to a simmer over high heat, and then we're going to turn it down and just let it simmer till it's reduced. The recipe said this takes 15 minutes. I will just warn you, this took a lot longer than 15 minutes in my case. So I end up about 20 minutes in, cranking up the temperature, and I think I ran it at medium the entire time remaining that it took to reduce this to a quarter cup from 1 cup of cider. You'll see I've also sprayed my special baked donut pans there. And we're just gonna get ready for the recipe. Here I am initially turning that down to a simmer. Over on the countertop, we're gonna start with a quarter cup of whatever vegetable oil you have on hand. If it's olive, great, avocado, doesn't matter. 1 cup of applesauce, and I always use unsweetened applesauce. Use whatever you've got. Now the apple juice I'm using has added sugar to it, so I am going to do pretty light on the 1 cup of sugar that the recipe calls for. I probably went with 3/4 cup. And then you're going to add 2 eggs. And then pull out your vanilla extract, and we'll need 1 teaspoon of that. Then we're just going to whisk all of this together. Actually, I'm going to start with just my spoon here. At the time that you're done combining these first few ingredients, it does want you to add the reduced apple juice, apple cider. Unfortunately, mine's not going to be ready, so I'm just going to add that at the end of the recipe. The recipe also calls for having a separate bowl for your dry ingredients, and you can see I'm just going to add that on top. And we're going to put in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. This is a 1/2 cup measure, so I'm going to take 4 scoops of that. And then 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, and a little bit of salt. The recipe calls for 1 1/2 teaspoons. I'm probably using about a 1/2 teaspoon. And then I'm just going to give the dry ingredients a little fluff there before I incorporate everything. Now I'm going to stop short of combining these. This says just to stir until just incorporated. I'm going to stop there because I'm going to give this another mix when I get the apple juice off the stove top. The recipe doesn't say anything about cooling that off, so I'm just going to go ahead and add my reduced quarter cup of apple cider or apple juice in my case directly to the bowl, and then we'll just mix everything up quick. And again, I'm going as quick and as gentle as I can because I'm trying not to over mix the ingredients. Guys, the pans I'm going to be using, I found on Amazon. They're just Wilton cake pans, and they seem to be very good quality. They are a non-stick pan. And you'll notice here I'm not over mixing this. I'm just going to kind of stop here. I will take my rubber spatula and kind of get everything into the pan before I dump this into a Ziploc bag. Now this is one of my used Ziploc bags that have been cleaned out. We do that, actually Rod does that with all of our Ziplocs. So this is a good use to give this one second life. And I'm just going to go ahead and do the zipper on it, and then I'm going to set this to the side for a minute while I grab my pans. Here I'm going to just cut off. I cut off like a 1/2 inch of the bag there. And then this works just really slick to fill these up. The recipe states to fill these nearly to the rim. So I left about 1/8 of an inch, and that seemed to be just about right. Although I did come up with more than 12 donuts, I ended up with 15. I probably could have just done 2 extra, but I don't think I could have filled those any fuller than that without having a big mess. So my oven's preheated to 325, and I'm going to use both racks in my oven. I've made a note to myself though to be sure to switch the pans halfway through. The pan on the bottom actually cooks better than the pan on the top, and they just came out a nice brown color. The ones on the top are baked through, no problem. I just wish I had a little bit more color to them. The cook time on the recipe said 12 to 14 minutes, and I did several minutes longer than that. And like I said, the top pan could have gone probably for an extra minute over that. So definitely keep an eye on your oven. You can poke these with a toothpick, which is what I'm going to do to make sure that they're okay before they come out. I also could have used my temperature gauge up there, the little red thing sticking to the top of the oven. But I choose not to. You can tell when a baked product like this is done, much like cookies. They spring back at you, and they're beautiful when they come out of the oven. I do a little bit of sugar on the top. Most of the sugar, when I flip these over onto the cooling rack, is going to go on the countertop, which is just fine. These do sit in your pan for 10 minutes before you try to put them on your cooling rack. Now, I am just going to skip the glaze that this recipe calls for. It's a powdered sugar glaze with some of the apple cider in it. The donuts that I really like up north are just shaken in some sugar. So I'm just going to do this light coating of sugar over the top of them, and when I pick them up, of course, most of that is just going to go bye-bye, but enough sticks to them to just give you a taste of that sweetness from the sugar. If you like glaze though, make that. On a wine glass. I should have started this recipe first because of the time to allow the dough to rise, but I did not. Instead, while that apple cider was reducing on the stove, I went ahead and started making my homemade dog food. So this recipe, I didn't get everything shown. You stir together first the yeast, flour, brown sugar, and salt. And you also should use a stand mixer if you have it. Guys, you may remember I broke my stand mixer not too long ago, and I still haven't replaced it. So I've mixed the flour, the dry ingredients, and then I've added my egg and a yolk, and then some apple cider, part of the apple cider and part of the cream. And now the recipe calls for letting your stand mixer do all the work for you. And of course, I'm old school, so it's no big deal to mix up a dough. Now, one note, the recipe does call for instant yeast, and I only have active yeast in my cupboard, so I realize that this is going to take longer to rise than the recipe states, an hour to an hour and a half. So just be aware of that. Use instant yeast if you have it. Otherwise, increase your rising time. And this is also a kind of cool, cloudy day. And so I had the windows open at this point, and I did go ahead and shut the window. And I'm going to be using my microwave with the light on to let the dough rise. And unfortunately, I have lots of things to go in and out of the microwave. So sometime the bowl, I'd look over and oops, there it would be on the countertop instead of in the microwave with the light on. So here we've got basically everything incorporated. We're going to get all of this mixture out of the bowl, and then we're just going to start kneading it. If you're letting your stand mixer do it, it says 10 to 12 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and do on the 12-minute end of things by hand kneading. And it's honestly, this is kind of therapeutic for me just to mix dough by hand. So I don't mind this at all. The recipe notes say that the dough may be slightly sticky, and it is very, very slightly sticky. But you can see I don't even need to use any water on my hands. This is actually quite a nice dough once everything gets incorporated. So just knead away or let your machine do the kneading. Handmade cinnamon rolls are not a convenience item, guys, so be sure to commit a couple hours here to get this ready. Hopefully you'll have your stand mixer up and running so you won't have to hand knead this, but the recipe does state it will take a total of 2 hours and 50 minutes. And most of that, of course, is just, the time it takes for the dough to rise. Here I am just about ready to get this dough finished, and I'm going to go ahead and use the same bowl that the dough just came out of. I will spray that with cooking spray. I'll put my dough in. I'll flip the dough over so it gets coated on both sides. In this case, I gave it a little spritz on the top and then put saran wrap on it. It goes into my microwave, so it's ready in about 2 hours. While our dough is rising, we're going to start our apple fritter cake. So we're going to begin with 2 apples. It says 1 or 2, just go with 2. Golden Delicious or Granny Smith is what they recommend. Of course, I'm using a Tango and a Gala here. And it does not say anything about peeling these, so I'm going to leave the peels on. And just a note, it works out just fine. So go ahead and do that. Prepare your pan. This is a 9x13, and I just use cooking spray on it. Then I'm going to go right back to slicing these apples and then chopping them into roughly 1/4-inch pieces. And I'm going to slice them so they're no more than 1/4 inch thick, and then just kind of give them a fine chop here. And I'll put those in a bowl, and then we're going to add some other goodies to these too. The recipe is kind of divided into 3 parts: a cake, which we're working on now, a cinnamon sugar swirl that will go into the cake once right before we bake it, and then a glaze, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to make a glaze for the cinnamon rolls, and if we need it, we can add that. Now, here's our apples, and to the apples, we're going to add the cinnamon and a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. That's a 1/2 cup measure, so it looks like more. And then just give those a mix. Now, on this day, I do have a fly kind of terrorizing me in the kitchen, so cover that up if you're concerned. Here, we're going to start on the batter portion of the cake. That is a cup of apple juice. I'm not using the apple cider. A stick of butter that's been melted and cooled slightly. 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar, and 1/4 cup of sour cream. This is more or less 1/4 cup. I'm just using up the rest of this container of sour cream. If you're new to cooking and baking, go ahead and measure. Next up is 1½ teaspoons of good vanilla extract. Then crack 2 eggs, and it does say to have these at room temperature, which, surprise, surprise, mine were at room temperature this day. And then because this apple juice has sugar, I'm just going to use 1/4 cup of sugar instead of the 1 cup the recipe calls for. Get your whisk out and then give this all a good whisk to incorporate everything. You want to do this basically until all of these ingredients are very well combined. Then we're going to add 3 cups of all-purpose flour. This is a 1/2 cup measure, so bear with me while I get my 3 cups in there. And then this recipe calls for both baking powder and baking soda. We've got 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. And 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. This is Himalayan sea salt. I'm just going to use about 1/2 teaspoon. Now grab your whisk and you're going to want to combine these ingredients until they're nearly combined. So I'm going to stop about now, and then I'm going to add in the apple mixture. And the recipe states just to fold the apples in. So I am going to switch over to my spatula and just gently fold those apples into your batter. Now, this is, I can just tell you, this is smelling delicious, just this batter. But I want to prepare you, this is another recipe that's going to take a little investment of time, because the first thing you're going to want to do is cut into this as soon as it comes out of the oven. But the recipe does state to let this cool until almost totally cool, so 1 to 2 hours. And that just will give you a better texture to your cake if you don't just cut into it right away. Here we're going to reserve 1/2 cup of that batter. And then the rest of the batter is going to go right into our sprayed baking pan. That's a 9x13. Once you get all the goodness out of your bowl there, you're just going to want to spread the batter evenly over your cake pan. Once you're done with that, we're going to start preparing the second component, which is our cinnamon sugar swirl. We're going to use 1 stick of unsalted butter. Guys, no worries. If you only have salted, just use it. Maybe cut back on the salt you used in the cake. Then we've got a 3/4 cup measure of brown sugar, 1½ tablespoons of ground cinnamon, and just a little sprinkle of salt. And we'll mix this all together. The next part of the recipe calls for dolloping this mixture on top of your prepared cake. As you'll see, it's pretty liquid, so I don't think there's much dolloping to be had, so I just end up kind of pouring it all over. And then you'll take that reserved 1/2 cup of batter that's sitting there, and you're going to dollop that over the top of this cinnamon sugar mixture. Then you'll use what they say is a butter knife to swirl and fold the batter and the cinnamon swirl together. You're going to see, I'm just going to use my spatula that's already dirty. There's no sense in getting another utensil dirtied. And then just kind of lift up gently from the bottom and do a little marbling. This doesn't look real pretty, but guys, it doesn't matter. It's going to taste delicious. Now, hopefully you've already preheated your oven. That should be set at 350. And look at this. Isn't this pretty? Maybe not, but it turns out good. Don't worry. That's going to go into the oven. You're going to cook it till 40 minutes until your toothpick comes out clean, or however you test your cakes. And I will tell you that this cooked just about perfectly in 40 minutes. And I just set it on my island then on a couple hot pads and let it cool off. Now we're back to our preparing our apple mixture for the cinnamon rolls. And this particular recipe then calls for 3 medium apples. They recommend Granny Smith. Again, I'm using Sweet Tango and the Gala. This recipe though, you are going to want to peel, core obviously, and then very finely chop your apples. I'm not sure that mine were very finely chopped, but I chopped them. These apples are going to become the filling in the cinnamon rolls. So these are going to get cooked in a skillet on your stove top. I just used my cast iron. You're going to add a little bit of cornstarch. It calls for 2 teaspoons. And then it does call for apple pie spice. And again, I'm just going to use cinnamon for this. I don't have separate apple pie spice, and we love cinnamon and apples, so this will work out perfectly. That was 1.5 teaspoons of that, then a 1/4 cup of the brown sugar. We're going to use a 1/2 cup of our apple cider mix, and then just a quick shake of salt. This again, Himalayan sea salt, use whatever you've got. We'll give this a stir. Here you mainly just want to make sure that the spices are well incorporated into those apples. Now over on our stovetop, we want to turn our heat on medium, and you want to stir these often because this juice is going to start to become almost like a syrup. So initially I don't keep as close of an eye on it, and then as it gets hotter and hotter and it starts reducing down, definitely you don't want to get too far away from this. You don't want to burn this, guys. Back over on the countertop, we're going to take our remaining 1/2 cup of brown sugar and 3 teaspoons of cinnamon or apple pie spice, whatever you're using. And you're just going to mix that up and set that aside. This is also a good time to notice that the 1/4 cup of butter that you're going to be using on top of the dough needs to be room temperature. It needs to be soft to enable you to spread the butter over the dough. So take that out of the fridge, guys. And this one calls for an 8-inch or 9-inch square pan rather. And you're just going to coat that with vegetable spray, cooking spray, and set that aside. And here I remember the butter. So we're getting that out of the fridge and making sure it's going to come to room temperature. I think I put that in the microwave. Now our apples are done, and I highly recommend you do this. In fact, I'm going to recommend you do a little bit more than what I did. And this is to remove the juice. You're going to actually, the juice is now like a syrup. So you're actually going to save the syrup. That's going to be used later. And you really want to get as much of the syrup out of here as you can. Now, I did not. I wish I'd done a little bit more, been a little bit more forceful in getting this syrup out of the apples. I did not, and you'll see how I combated that when I put the rolls together, when I do my jelly roll of the cinnamon rolls. We're going to set these aside, and we'll do our next batch of apples here to get our syrup removed from the apples. Now you're going to want to get your countertop prepared. In my case, I'm just going to use the silicone mat. I'm not going to need any flour on the surface. You guys test it on your location and your dough. I'm just patting this down. If you already punched the dough down, that'll be just fine. The dough is nice and soft. It's just a beautiful dough. Like I said, it took a lot longer for it to rise in my case. Then I'm going to grab my rolling pin, just lightly flour the surface, and you're going for a 10 by 14 inch rectangle. The dough performs beautifully, and I have no problem getting this rolled out. We'll kind of square off the edges here a little bit. And then we're going to start putting our filling in. We're going to start with that 1/4 cup of softened butter. You'll see in my microwave with the light on, this is a little more than softened, but it's fine. It'll work just fine. You're going to spread this all the way to the edges except on one of the short edges. And you'll see here at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to leave about a 1/2 inch with no filling on it. And that's just so you can seal the seam once you get these rolled up. Next up, just spoon on your sugar. And guys, you don't need to be pretty. It doesn't even really matter how even you are. I'm real fussy about this for some reason, and you don't have to be. Just get it on there as evenly as you have patience for, and it will be just fine. And once that's all finished, our final step then is the apples. And here you'll see mine are just a little soupy, and you'll see why that makes a difference in a few minutes here. Again, it all works out in the end. It just, less liquid in these apples is better. So we will spread these out as evenly as we can. And yeah, if you're going to take a little time on anything, perhaps this is the step that you'll want a little more patience for, because you do want to get these distributed evenly throughout the roll, and that just makes sure every cinnamon roll will have a little bit of apple. So once we get those kind of dolloped onto the dough, then I'm going to take my spatula and kind of smooth those out over the entire dough, except for that little strip at the bottom there. You'll see I haven't put any toppings on that part. Now we're going to start on the other end, not the end with the little border. And you'll notice, see how the filling is kind of bunching up there? So what I do is just kind of pick it up here when I get toward the other end and seal it. So it works out fine. As you'll see, we kind of handle it. Cut off any of the ends that need trimming. Only that one end needed trimming. And then you're going to cut this into 9 as equal a pieces as you can. Here's our 8 by or 9 by 9 pan, and we're using a serrated knife to cut these. And see all the juice that's coming out? Well, what I figure out is I'm going to put that on the bottom of the cinnamon rolls, so it will kind of bake into the rolls. And I get much better about doing this. See, I'm using the spatula now. That works out just a lot better. And we'll get these last couple of ones done. And the little bit on the end, that last cinnamon roll is a little on the small side, so I'm just going to combine that and make that into one cinnamon roll. Look at all that yummy filling, guys. There was a lot of it, and it was very good. So here we are. We're going to put this back in the microwave with the light on, or any nice warm place that you've got, for about another ½ hour. In my case, that did take a little bit longer than that. This is the glaze that we're preparing, and this is 2 ounces of cream cheese and 2 tablespoons of the reserved apple juice or apple syrup. And I'm going to end up using my whisk to combine this. It still doesn't combine real easily. And then you want it of the consistency so you can drizzle this over your cinnamon rolls. And so I'm going to end up probably putting in 2 additional tablespoons of the apple juice / syrup. And I'm not putting in, it calls for 2½ tablespoons of powdered sugar. And again, that's because the apple juice was already sweetened. This doesn't need any more sweetening. And so I'm going to leave that powdered sugar out and just use this apple juice till we get it just the right consistency. I'm going to be baking these cinnamon rolls after dinner, so I'm going to cover that and put the glaze in the refrigerator. Here the rolls are now fully risen, ready to go in the oven. But wait, there's a secret ingredient here we're going to add. The other 1/4 cup of heavy whipping cream is going to get poured over the top of these rolls before it goes into the 350-degree oven. Look at that. I've never done this. I've seen lots of recipes where people do this. I'm not sure what the purpose is, but let's see how these turn out. Again, put them in the oven for 350 degrees, and you're going to want to cook these 25 to 28 minutes. And I think I did the 28-minute end of things, and they turned out beautifully. Look at that. So let me tell you how excited Rod was about this day of baking. The smells coming out of the kitchen were incredible, and look what he got at the end of the day. We did a little like apple dessert smorgasbord. On the bottom left is the cinnamon roll, the apple fritter cake is on the bottom right, and that little big apple cider donut is up at the top. Now, the baked apple cider donut, the flavor was good, but the texture's not right for a donut. So, unfortunately, that is a recipe that I probably won't make again, but I will be in search of other apple cider donuts. If you guys know of any option for a baked, not fried donut, let me know. As far as the apple fritter cake, this is the one that I was perhaps most excited about, and it didn't disappoint. It's a great texture. We didn't put the glaze on it, like if you look at the picture in the magazine, and it was still delicious. This serves 12 people, this apple fritter cake. I suggest that you cut them smaller, and just a little bit smaller pieces I think would be great for a serving size. And Rod loves cinnamon rolls, so you know what his favorite was. The trick with the adding the cream at the end, I'm not sure what that added to it, perhaps moisture. It seemed to bake in, and it worked out just fine. But perhaps the real test will be when we take the rolls out of the freezer a month from now and see if they've lost any of the texture, any of the moistness. If they stay better than our previous cinnamon roll recipe, this may become a new favorite. This was both of our favorite of the whole dessert smorgasbord. Guys, we really hope you like this content, and if you do, please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments about your favorite apple recipes for this time of year, any time of year, leave them in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.